Hey everyone, welcome to my top 5 gameplay tips to climb in Season 12. So this is just going to be the things I think are the biggest issues and the easiest to fix that I've noticed in my coaching sessions to help you guys improve and achieve your goals for Season 12. So starting things off, it's really important that you play your first 3 waves correctly. Very often, I see people either not have a plan for how to play the first 3 waves or just not know what to do with them in general, and that's really important because the first 3 waves, they affect your laning phase quite a lot, which in turn affects the rest of the game, so it's really important that you get this right. While it is lane and matchup dependent, some common openers that you guys can try at a slow push and crash the first 2 or 3 waves, which gives you level and minion advantage, or in difficult matchups, you can let the first 3 waves come to you so you don't get harassed as much. Also in some matchups, you may be able to go for like a cheater recall after pushing 3 waves. If you aren't sure what these mean or how to do them, I highly recommend you checking out my laning guide. And if you're still not sure how to play the first 3 waves, I recommend looking up a VOD of the matchup you're playing after the game. Just kind of watch for the first 2 minutes to see what they do the 3 waves. So, if you play a matchup, let's say Kali versus Zed, just look up the matchup and see what they do with those first 3 waves. And then in the future, you'll know what to do in that matchup. Next is warding. So warding correctly, especially in the early game, it makes a really big difference. There's pretty much no quicker way for a game to get out of control than just like giving your laner or the enemy jungler first blood. Especially if they're like a really hard snowballing champ. I think an easy way for you guys to fix this kind of straight away is to check where their jungler starts and then place a ward at 230 on the opposite side. Normally junglers do like 3 camps or 2 camps and then swap sides. So if you place a ward at 230, it should protect you as long as you kind of like position close to it in the lane so that you're not, hugging towards the side where you don't have vision. It's really nice because this ward lasts for 1.5 minutes and you actually get your second trinket at 4 minutes. So if you place a ward at 230, it gives you 100% protection until 4 minutes when you get your second ward. Then after your first base, try and get a pink if you can. And then from that point on, just make sure you have like a pink or a ward down somewhere and like kind of hug towards it. And I think that can save you guys a lot of like really unnecessary deaths. Thirdly, we have base timings. It's really important that you plan your base timings ahead of time in order to like lose as little as possible. So something I see a lot in lower reloads is a lot of CS just like lost for free when people base at bad times, or sometimes the opposite thing, they kind of delay their base so long that they end up losing more CS as a result. So they're kind of like greeding for more CS and it actually ends up costing them a lot. So in general, when you're ahead, you should try push before basing so that you make sure you don't lose anything. And when behind, if you can base before a cannon wave so the enemy kind of has to take longer to push it in, you can come back and get more of the CS. That's ideal. In the mid game, it's not as important to get like those bases where you don't lose as much. Like, of course, it's better if you don't lose anything, but it's much more important in the mid game to kind of base around objectives. So one rule that I like to use is try like be based and back on the map a minute before a dragon spawns to give yourself the best chance to secure it. So you might see something like you push out the side wave at 1:30, you base at 1 minute, you come back on the map and you're ready to contest that dragon. Another thing that I see super common is people falling really far behind in the mid game. So it's super important obviously in the mid game that you keep your farm up, otherwise it just kind of becomes hard for you to continue to carry the game. Your kind of lead falls off, or you kind of, if you're behind, you're never really going to get back in. So very often I see people farm well in the early game and then their farm just kind of falls off a cliff. And I think the reason for that is farming in the mid game is very different from the early game. So in the early game, it's more about like your actual right clicking, your laning, your base timings and stuff like that. But in the mid game, it's more like about moving efficiently, like not sharing gold and XP, like pushing the side lane and farming as many camps as you can. So it's sort of hard to give you guys like a one size fits all rule here, but my best advice is just to like try find opportunities to farm. And if you're ever not farming like any creeps or you're sharing gold and XP with someone else on your team, it should normally feel bad. I've talked about this quite a bit more in depth in my mid-game videos, so I'd really recommend checking that out in the description. Finally, I think it's super important that you identify a bunch of things before you even start team fighting. So you should think a lot about who the biggest threats are, like what champions are the most threatening to you. It could be assassins, it could just be champs that bring CC, as well as like what cooldowns are most important for you to think about. So we've got stuff like, Malphite or Orianna, really game-changing teamfight ultimates. There might also be stuff that's shorter. So we got stuff like, Blitzcrank hooks, stuff that's still threatening, but not quite on that same level of just like fight defining. And they can also be cooldowns that you might have to wait to be used before you engage. So it could be stuff like Thresh Lantern or Kindred Ult. It's really important to consider those because oftentimes like your engage can be really stunted if you don't wait for a cooldown to be wasted. And especially in lower reloads, you will see a lot of those cooldowns kind of wasted for free. And then if you're just a bit patient, you can find like a really good opportunity. Another thing that's important are thinking about which targets are the most important to kill on the enemy team. So normally it'll be the enemy AD ADC and mid, but it might change depending on the champs, like in who's fed and who isn't. And lastly, you really want to think about what your role is in the team fight. So it could be flanking, peeling, engaging, just playing like a regular front to back team fight where you're kind of DPSing their tanks from behind your tanks. But basically, it's just really important to have some sort of plan in place before the fight starts. It'll make it a lot easier for yourself, and you'll be able to get those fights that just kind of like fall in your favor a bit more often. So guys, that's going to be it for this video. All the things that I brought up in this video, they're things that I've seen happen like really often in my coaching that I've done so far. My coaching VODs are on my second channel if you want to check that out, again, linked in the description below. But I really tried to pick things that I think are relatively easy to fix, or at least to make some progress towards, and will make a really big difference to your game. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, obviously, feel free to drop them below. Sorry, it feels a bit clickbaity. I did try and like make sure the information is really, really good, but I understand like some people are kind of annoyed by these sorts of videos anyway. But if you did like it, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.